at that time. She was probably 17 or 18, I would guess.
We're meeting here at, this is in Pomfret, right?
Pomfret, right.
Walt Seigmund and Henry Cole, and we're just going over, he's showing things from the original Oklahoma.
This was April 24th, 1955. Let's see, I guess I must have kept those pages that had the had some relevant material on it. Yeah,
And
this is
the, okay.
There's Robert Surtees, who was actually was the cinematographer, and there's Rogers and Hammerstein and everybody. There's the brains: O'Brien, Zinnemann, Hammerstein, and Todd. Dr. O'Brien looking a little more formal than the others. There's Shirley Jones again, singing to her canary. It was. I think Henry and I remember this as being the most exciting period in our lives, working on Oklahoma. Don't you agree?
Yes. The AO before that was very parsimonious as far as money's concerned. Going into a period where money didn't count and time was everything, it was just a complete change.
Here's the news, Friday, October 18th, 1985, obviously a retrospective of Todd AO with much of the same stuff that's in that brochure over there.
That was in the Southbridge News?
Yeah, the Southbridge News.
1985?
I don't know, I just put this stuff out. And then, what was his name? Our friend Gunter, Roy Gunter, did this thing in October 1985. By that time, I had grown a beard and looked like Methuselah there. And there's the Todd AO camera. I don't know what the rest of this is. I guess I kept the whole thing. No, here's.
Oh, it shows the lens.
There's Dr. O'Brien with the projector, and there's his son Brian Jr., who incidentally looks older than his father, even though he's his son. But that shows you the vagaries of time. And here are the designs of the various lenses that were designed for the process. And believe it or not, I'm going to show you examples of this lens, and I think more or less this one, but I'm not sure. This is just a symbolic showing the concept of use of an aspheric correcting lens. And this is one of the original cameras with the so-called bug-eye lens on it. Weldon Schumacher and his wife, and his father. This is Elmer Schumacher, Sr., sitting right next to him, and Mrs. Schumacher, all lined up.
That's a 1955
This is
AO?
1955, October 20th, 1955. It was out in quotes from the New York critics. For those who did not read the critics' reports of Oklahoma premiere October 10th, we've edited reviews of impressions printed in leading New York papers. The effect is not completely three-dimensional, but there is a good illusion of depth, and director Fred Zinnemann has used it imaginatively to create a rural atmosphere, etc., etc. We won't read them all. There's Bosley Crowther, Kate Cameron, and so forth. What else is in here? I think that's the main thing. He says, who could forget?
Well, so that was another, there must have been about a week of a series of those articles?
Yeah, he did. He did, I think, 2 or 3 of them. And we just had fun reminiscing at that time. You should have been in on it, Henry.
This is...
Maybe you were asked. Did they ask you at the time? Did Roy Gunter ask you?
I think I talked to him.
Oh, you did? Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oklahoma.
Henry's memorabilia is even better. Oh, look at that.
So now, that also was at the premiere, is that what you're saying?
Yes,
what was
yes,
the book?
they invited the governor of Oklahoma there.
What was the book that you have by your elbow then? That was the souvenir?
The same one that Walt had. It's
but
just a
that's
promotion.
Oh, the performances.
Yeah.
This would have been handed out.
Oh, I see. Only at the premiere was the...
Yeah, yeah. I guess they mostly seem to be black and whites.
Well, they were talking mostly about Oklahoma there, not the picture, but the state.
From Collier's magazine, Around the World in 80 Days.
I think it said Collier's. I haven't found it. Yes, it's Collier's.
I never did see that.
And Henry's also had the original agreement from,
That,
AO,
I
that's
think
amazing.
Around the World in 8 Days was really
This is
the high point of Todd AO. And was equipment developed in the 1920s for other processes, one of which was a very strange one. When color films were still not that well developed, they actually developed one particular wide film process in which they took 3 simultaneous pictures through 3 different color filters so that they could use what they call essentially additive color.
Those were the actual cameras that we rebuilt to,
Yeah.
for ToddAO.
Because they were I think they were 8-hole pull downs, and they had to be modified to 5, because the Todd AO frame has a 5-hole pull down. Now a standard 35mm film has a 4-hole pull down, but the Todd AO camera pulls 5 holes, and that someone had to decide what proportion you wanted, and it was established that 5 holes provided about the right proportion of the 65mm film. And I see that Henry has, what, well, negatives and positives?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
our
We
neighbors,
actually inherited a whole bunch of parts.
Yeah.
That
really?
There were cameras made in Germany. What was the name of those? I've forgotten. But there were not cameras, projectors made in Germany for a wide film process. They were real clunkers, but they gave us a chance to project this stuff early on, before any of that material was built. It took a long time to develop and build the original Todd AO projector, which was the one that we'll be talking about. So we had to have something in the meantime, and these Bernemann, I think Bernemann was the name of the company, a German company that built these projectors, and they were built as silent projectors. They had no means for doing sound films. They were done in the 20s before sound film was.
And my neighbor said he was involved in making the sprocket holes, Larry Seigmund.
Oh yeah, Larry was involved.
Yeah.
Well, as I was saying, Dr. Bryan put together a team, Henry, and a whole group of people that worked for Henry, the engineers that Henry had, draftsmen and designers. Myself, I was drawn in immediately. In fact, that was the very first thing that well, it wasn't. It was the second thing I got involved in. The first thing I got involved was trying to do something with Building 17, which you remember, Don, in 1953 was a hollow shell. It had been started by Dr. O'Brien's predecessor, and but it was never completed. So one of the things that Dr. O'Brien asked me to do was to look at the layout and modify from the point of view of building a half-scale theater in the middle of the building in which Todd AO could be projected. And we did that. We had to move things
Which
around.
accounts for the original conference room?
That's right, exactly.
Wow, really?
It was set up so that they could project Todd AO motion pictures at half scale. Now a 25-foot screen instead of a 50-foot screen, which was what was going to go in the theaters.
Before Brian O'Brien came on board, they had a fellow by, I remember, R. Bowling Barnes, wasn't it? Who was,
Yes.
Vice President of Research and Development. And I at that time became manager of ophthalmic lens development. And I was located on almost exactly where you are in the 2L building, Dick, up on the top floor. And I well remember one day Walter Stewart coming up into our area and coming up to me, and with a big smile on his face, he says, "We've got Brian O'Brien for you." I remember his saying that.
And you wondered, is that a good thing or not
Well,
a
it
good
was a
thing?
change, and there were some very strange things relative to the administration of R. Bowling Barnes. Of course, there have been strange things associated with just about every
Who did he
administration.
tell this to?
What?
Who
To
was?
Don's
To me.
group. And you
So,
personally.
Walter Stewart told me.
Yes.
Because I was responsible for ophthalmic lens development, and of course Brian O'Brien was one of the biggest figures in the world in optics, and he was very proud that he'd gotten someone of that caliber in optics to come to American Opera.
Well, the
I
story.
remember that very
yeah.
well. I remember right where I was standing.
The verdict have come. So I think he was anxious to find someone who would replace Barnes.
Well, of course, at the time that the research group moved away from Southbridge, the argument was, and how much of it was propaganda and how much of it was really believed, I don't know, was that research people really could not do deep research surrounded by such a commercial enterprise. And
Yeah,
there were
well, that's
people coming
nonsense.
in asking all kinds of factory-oriented questions. So
That's
they would
nonsense.
move from the way, so they were in their attitude tower, so to speak,
Yeah.
so that they, and closer to New York, where there would be more facilities than there were in the isolated Southbridge. Then,
Well,
of course,
as you know, that,
when the lab
that,
came back, the argument was exactly the reverse.
exactly, that you needed
It's
the
in-
synergism.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they used exactly the same arguments when they decided to build a lab in Framingham.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They took it away again. Don, it's like in any organization, what you do is you centralize and then you decentralize.
I've seen that
You
myself.
centralize and you decentralize.
And the
And-
funny
and-
part of the Framingham one was, not only did they do it with research, but then at one point they did it with top management. They decided that top management should not be so close to the everyday managers that they were getting in their hair. So they moved the president and the vice presidents to Framingham.
Really?
All I can say is whatever they did didn't work very well.
Right. That's for sure.
But getting back to that period in 1953 when Dr. Bryan came on board, as Henry has already said, he changed the climate of the R&D enormously. I mean, basically, he must have gotten a blank check from Walter Stewart, and Walter Stewart probably convinced the others to go along with it. Because this is going to be the biggest thing that hit American opera since World War II, presumably, and maybe the biggest thing ever. And Dr. Bryan was an extremely persuasive guy. I mean, he could make a tremendous presentation. He had a presence, he had a way of speaking, he had a way
It
of...
was in Rollins' office, and Rollins was saying that he'd just never seen anything like it. And this guy, Todd, hire him, fire him, hire him, fire him. He was just almost ready to lose his marbles with it.
Well, again, this is why, as I say, I think Henry and I, in reflecting on this, always consider it to be the most exciting time, because essentially, suddenly, the research department became the preeminent part of the company, and almost everybody else sort of had to sort of lie low and hope to survive. I mean, I don't know how you felt about it, Don, but you probably said, I'm in the shadow of this thing at this point. You might have felt that way.
Not really. I felt some of the excitement of it. I never participated directly in any aspect of it, but I was close enough to the people of it, because I'm director of research, so that I knew
Yeah.
what was
Well,
going
you
on.
obviously were
And,
managers.
you know, I was even able to look out my window and see Oscar Hamilton standing in the driveway.
Oh, did you see Richard Rogers too, or just?
They were together. They were together. There's a wonderful picture, which I don't have a copy of, I think Brian Jr. does, of his father and Rogers and Hammerstein, or maybe Mike Todd, all walking out from the research
think I
department.
might
Do you have a
have
copy of
here.
that?
Oh, you do?
Henry's got a wonderful collection. He's way ahead of me.
I didn't have everything, but I don't throw things away, I'm afraid.
Well, you shouldn't. You shouldn't.
Wow.
This is some samples of the film. And see that this is the
No.
35 millimeter version.
All right,
The-
let me see if I can.
The problem with that film, of course, was that a lot of it bleached out, and only the magentas really seemed to have.
Yeah, that is it.
But that's great. That's great. Well, what Henry has here in this
is a
wonderful,
bug-eye shot.
yeah,
Maybe
in
a
this
baby
wonderful
bug-eye.
collection.
Yeah.
What was the focal length of the lens, you know?
Pardon?
What was
Is
the
that
focal
you?
length of the-
Yes.
Probably
This
less
is
than
the
an inch.
baby bug eye, and it
Then I
was
got that
built
little
so
strap.
that Mezzi Barber could show us picture going over
You gotta let
the
me
ski
out.
jump.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
Gotta let me
Yes,
out.
never did it.
No, he
but,
chickened out.
No, he's just,
What do you mean, check it? Why would he checking out? I mean,
He was-
he's a good skier.
Hey, well, a picture may be interesting, but there's the real thing. I saved it. That was the support for the baby bug-eye lens, and Dr. O'Brien provided the camera, which was a
Get a picture of that, Eric. It's
Hey.
right here.
35 millimeter
I am getting a picture of it.
Bell and Howell IMO camera, which he owned. And obviously he took it back, but this was the support that was built by Henry's group of engineers, and here is the lens. I have the baby bug eye. I mean, I hope that you guys will realize that some of this
It's a
stuff
lens, wide angle lens.
has ended up here without necessarily anybody knowing about it. But
Okay,
there it
this
is.
is the picture of,
Oh, Erica.
There's the baby bug eye.
Wow.
And that fitted right in here.
Okay, there's Oscar Hammerstein.
Now, the baby bug eye
It
was
was a 35mm version.
35
Where's Richard
millimeter.
Rogers?
But it's an
See that?
exact duplicate of the full bug eye.
I don't see
Yeah.
that Richard Rogers was there, actually, was he?
I didn't ever see Richard
Oh,
Rogers.
he came to one of the meetings. I'm gonna tell you a story about that too, because it's a little
That's
bit.
fascinating.
Hammerstein was on deck during almost all of the filming. This is Todd AO camera.
Try and get a picture of that. Wait a minute, let me get a picture of that too.
And this is the pull-down mechanism.
Is that the Mitchell?
Oh.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, Erica, let me,
And we use.
is it on?
Show, pull down another one and then show.
It came off one reel, it comes down and goes up around through here, down here, and then goes back up on the other take-up reel. And alternately, some register pins stop and hold the frame still, and then they will pull out and the claws will move down and advance the film.
And this is the film, so.
Dad, hold
That way they
on.
have a lot of the same pictures, so then
Yeah, one right after another.
These
It's like a
cameras
flip
used
book.
an arc lamp.
Oh, there's through the,
These cameras, I mean, not the
Many a
cameras,
new
the
day.
projectors used an arc lamp.
That's in the scene.
Yes, yes, yes. This is our camera in a blimp. The soundproof housing that they use to try to suppress the camera noise
oh, I see.
on the close-up shots.
That's interesting.
The basic
Got that.
Mitchell camera, which was being used by the industry, was called the NC,
Yes,
and the blimp version was the BNC. Is that
yes,
recall?
blimp.
Oh, you said those were made in Germany? Is
No,
that
no,
what
no,
you-
No,
no.
no.
These are made in
What was made in
California.
Germany originally?
The
you said?
Ernemann projectors, which we used just to get the program started, to be able
Okay.
to show some of the 65mm. There were no 65mm
But where were
projectors.
those made? The
Those
project-
are made in Hollywood.
In
or
Hollywood.
in California. Henry knows very well because
Butch told me that I was going to Los Angeles on Saturday, and this was on Thursday that he told me. And I was there for a week in February and a couple weeks in March, and I was the whole month of April, and then I was out there again in May and again in June, and about July, it was just a great experience for me. I asked Dr. Bryan if I could use my airfare and my vacation time to drive the family out. We had camping gear, and we did. And I remember leaving on 4th of July weekend, heading west, and we were supposed to be for just a couple of weeks of camera tests out there, but it was so handy having me out there that I got to be errand boy for, we find it was Armistice Day, November 11th, and we finally got home.
Wow.
The girl, we registered, enrolled the girl.
elaborate piece of equipment
This is
just
a screen that
just to
Didn't
test the
work.
screen,
Can you
to
Dave Lamar?
measure the reflection
training.
of this screen as a function of angle, because that turned out to be, I had done it manually with a little spectrometer, which resembled the projection situation in the theater. And now we had all sorts of curves and trying to determine what was in fact happening, you know, what were the actual measurements. And we did it over and over and over again. We even took the equipment out to textile leather to measure it there so that they could adjust the parameters of the forming process. When we worked on this for well over a year. Finally we said, it's not going to work. By that time, the printers had come along, and I got involved in the printers, and the person who took over on the screen was Will Hicks. And Will said, Okay, what works? White works. So what he did was to devise a screen which consisted of a white screen with ridges. He made deep ridges. By deep, I mean about the same scale, about a 1.5 millimeter, 1/16 of an inch, a series of ridges which blocked the cross light just enough so that you got adequate contrast with this rib screen. And with the white rib screen, it worked virtually the first time, and it was a very smart move. And he saw that you know, first of all, he became very well aware of the limitations of this, and we had to scrap it.
How are those ribs made in the white?
They were done in exactly the same way, using the wire, but now there were no bumps, and it was white. And white, unlike silver, doesn't have this specular process. It didn't show
I mean, the
defects.
difference was the color more than the pattern?
It was just plain white.
It was
white
more
diffuse.
diffuse.
More
less
diffuse.
speculous.
No, it was not specular at all. It was diffuse. But the ribs prevented what we call the cross illumination, and it worked. And since the scale was very small, you never saw them. I mean, they were way much smaller than what you could see from the audience. But as I say, this is one of my first real failures. Was that I was responsible for the screen, and it simply didn't work. And we spent a lot of money on it. I wouldn't be surprised if we spent $500,000 or more doing that. One of the things we did, incidentally, was to put a full-size screen up in the only place in the whole of American Optical where there was room for it. And you remember where it was? In the powerhouse. One whole end of the powerhouse, we built the frame and hung these screens as they were made as full-size screens. And we took one of the Ernemann projectors and put it up on a high platform at the other end of the powerhouse. In order to supply the arc for that, so we could project pictures, full-size pictures, they would use the DC supply to the water wheel that used to be on the dam, which was a small power supply for the company that was still running before the flood. It was destroyed in the flood, '55. But before then, that water wheel was still working. They would simply disconnect the water wheel, give me the exciter for that, which was a DC exciter, run that power up to the projector, strike the arc, and project pictures in the powerhouse. And it was a full-size screen, 50 feet wide and 20 feet high. Theater, whose name I've forgotten, in Buffalo, where they did a lot of the early screening. It was just a local
John
theater.
Davis, we know.
And the other one was the Century. There was a Century Theater, and I think that was in Buffalo. But there was also a local theater, and I remember going there on a couple of occasions. Of course, they also were able to
Now, local here, you mean?
No, local in Buffalo. See, the reason for that was that the projector was being developed in Buffalo, and they wanted to be able to take the equipment right to a theater in Buffalo to show films. So we were back and forth to Buffalo quite often. And they also had a setup at the MGM studios in Hollywood in order to show the rushes from the shooting of Oklahoma.
Now, you said for the kids that you actually, or maybe both of you, saw segments of the filming, or?
I saw a very small segment of it. In 1954, the Optical Society of America met in Los Angeles, and they had a very nice arrangement. I don't think you went on that. You were already there, I think. You were probably there in what, November 1954, possibly?
You came out on the train for
Yeah,
the
I came out on the train.
Society.
That's the point. That they actually arranged for a train to leave from Boston and go all the way to Los Angeles to take quite a group of people out. And others would join. I don't know if people came up from New York and maybe got into Chicago, but we went out to Chicago on the Boston and Albany, and then we picked up the Sunset Limited, which went through Texas and El Paso and through Arizona and so forth, and ended up in Los Angeles. And the thing I remember most of all, first of all, it was a lovely trip. Two, we actually stepped out of the train in Los Angeles, and suddenly I said, what is going on? My eyes were beginning to water. I was feeling very warm. It was the smog. In 1954, the smog that fall was absolutely dreadful. You looked out over the landscape, and it was yellow. It was absolutely yellow.
Wow.
The pictures I took at that time are yellow. It was terrible. It probably still is to some extent, but it was particularly bad then. They had made very little strides in the way of improving the quality of the air. And literally, your eyes were just water. You couldn't stop it because there was so
I
much
think that was
acid in the
before
air.
there was that much, well, there was a lot of traffic, I suppose.
Oh,
Well, goodness sakes, they were just in the process of beginning to realize that you couldn't let people use incinerators at all times of the day.
It was just dreadful that the smog was there at that time. Anyway, the fact is that when we got out there in 1954, we were given a chance to see some rushes of Oklahoma in the theater that was at the MGM studios, and I got at that time, and I may still have it somewhere, a pass to just simply enter the MGM studios myself. So my wife and I went, and we not only sort of wandered around, but we saw them shooting one particular sequence where Laurie and Curly are talking outside of one of the buildings, and there's a stove, and I remember this, where he sort of backs up and sits on the stove, and she says, "Hey, you're sitting on the stove." Well, the stove was cold, but he jumps off, and I remember that particular sequence.
Remember that?
That's the only sequence I actually saw being filmed. And then, because we didn't want to hang around there, we started walking around through the studios. We went through some of the sound stages, and there were lots of sets and things like, you know, just various paraphernalia and so forth. It was just a very unusual experience. Just one afternoon or something like that, and then that was it. We never got back. It was fun.
Wow.
But you must have been out there
Well,
at the same time.
I was in and out of MGM quite a lot, but I didn't see too much of the filming there. I remember when Warden Brown and some others from AO came, I was involved in helping them go over.
No, well, that's it.
But I spent about a week up in San Rafael Valley in Dallas, and they built the farmhouse up there. Got the idea of painting it green so that it would show up green in the shots, and then it rained and the paint ran and you had green puddles.
Apparently they had an absolute deluge there at one point, and some of the bigwigs were caught in a Cadillac, right in one of those arroyos, and was
They lost one Cadillac.
but they practically drowned some of the
arroyo.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh,
Oh, down in Arizona.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
when those floods occur,
They-
they're just violent.
Apparently, it was just in that area that something they hadn't planned on. There was a lunch cloud. In the morning, you'd see a cloud appear on the horizon, and about noon it was right overhead, then opened up in a deluge.
I was in Tucson last year. I remember driving along, and you come into valleys like this, and it
Don't
says,
stay in those.
warning, flood warning. What are you gonna do? Because on either side there are flood warnings.
Well, the thing is, you just keep an eye on the weather. Usually it's dry as a bone. There's nothing going on.
I nearly ruined a rental Chevrolet on my first trip out there. I driving along faster than I should because
That's
I was
how you
later
whoop
than I should.
about
And
it.
all of a sudden the road disappeared and I just plowed into the other side of the arroyo.
Now, you were
We
mentioning,
can talk about. Once the filming was completed, next, I should go back. It was recognized that one of the major technical problems for the process was going to be how will you deal with the fact that you're going to project from a booth that's high up in the back of the theater rather than straight on, because that's what Cinerama did. Project onto a screen that's curved like this and have the picture look like it's being projected straight on. That involved a major conformal remapping
See, that's
of
what this is.
photographs.
oh,
And a whole bunch of people, Henry included, I think you were working on the printers at that time. It started out, first, I did some preliminary work with the concept of, first of all, making some corrections for the fact that the bug eye lens has barrel distortion, so that all, like that picture that you brought in, all the straight lines are curved. And we worked on one particular process for just simply straightening those lines. But we never used it. It was, I forget which printer, it was CC printer or something like that. We never used that. Then I did a number of very, very crude tests of trying to have the negative tilted like this and the print curved like this so that it would resemble the theater, essentially. In other words, you were going to print the picture as though you had a small theater. But the trouble was that it was much too difficult to get the image from the flat picture, the negative, to be in focus on this curve thing. So we gave that up, and then Brian Jr. had the wisdom to say, first of all, that printers in general are not projection printers in the ordinary sense, but are continuous contact printers. And from the idea that you would be printing with a continuously moving film, grew the concept that you would do this process not for the whole picture, but for each strip at a time while you had continuously moving film. So that now it became just necessary to project a little slit-like part of the picture onto a curved, tilted surface to resemble the screen. And that's what, in effect, that's what this does. It takes the negative, which is, these happen to be prints, but it could just as well be negative. These rectangular negatives, and cuts them into little slices and then projects them piecemeal onto this curved surface. At the same time as the projection onto the curved surface, which produces what we call the droop distortion, it was also necessary for each of the two wide-angle lenses, the 128-degree lens and the 64-degree lens, to make the correction for the barrel distortion. And to do that, you actually stretched each of these lines a different amount in order to straighten them out. So this was essentially the barrel correction that was done along with the droop correction. And this is the Mark III printer. Henry wisely has kept some pictures of them because they, after the process began to come apart, these things were scavenged for all sorts of parts, and they vanished virtually.
Well, when they decided to get rid of them, 2 days, there wasn't anything left.
And the fact is that there was absolutely nothing on these that could possibly be of any use to anybody. At least one of them should have been preserved, intact, and sent to the George Eastman House or someplace, or just into a warehouse somewhere, so that one. Rogers was not there, but that's the one I remember. O'Brien and Todd.
I remember looking down and seeing
this is Zinnemann, Hornblow. I don't remember this guy here, because it's a great shot.
No, this dude, can you just show me that magnetic portion too?
Yeah. Oh,
Who's that?
Yeah.
that's Henry, right?
What are you working on at that point?
Yeah, that was the other side of the book. You took that picture, Walt.
What?
You took that picture.
I did?
Yes.
I'll be darned.
Who took this picture?
I think
Well,
Norman Powers might have taken that one going out. This is the magnetic track. There are two tracks on the outside of each of the perforation rows and one on the inside of each one. It shows almost a little better on this side because you see it covers the picture just a little bit. And that whole process developed by Ampex, who were also the people who developed the first of the BCRs.
I can still remember
Fred
being in
Hines.
Hartford. In
Fred Hines, I'd
Yeah,
forgotten
I
that name.
got to be the head of the president of ToddAO when it survived.
No. Gordon McRae. No, an awful lot of these people have died. I mean,
Do you remember-
Gordon McRae is dead.
Do you remember? I mean, do you remember talking to them in any way? Did you ever meet them?
No, not a single one of them.
I had a chance to take some personal snapshots of Gordon McRae and his wife, I think at the time was Sheila.
I'm sure that Charlotte Greenwood must have died a long time ago. She was already quite old when this was done. Back to this printer, which is kind of poignant in a way. After we spent all this time and money and technical energy and for both developing the printer and doing the printing and then having it not work out very well, my good friend Bob Hopkins, how we got into this conversation, I don't remember, but he said, you know, there's an article in the SMPTE journal that relates to this problem of correcting the for the screen. Why don't you look that up? Well, I did. It was by a couple of people from the Delft company in Holland. I got their names, but they're well-known engineers, optical engineers. And I said, hey, this is an interesting thing. Prior to that, months before, maybe a year before, the question did arise was there some way of doing this corrective printing or doing the correction without having to do this elaborate process that's in this printer? Because many times we had looked at images, you know, reflecting from the sides of cylinders and so forth, and seeing this same kind of distortion appear. I mean, you get the same thing by optical means. Well, this particular article referred to another way of doing the anamorphic projection of cinemascope images using mirrors rather than lenses. The version that was being used in America in almost every theater at that time was developed originally by a guy named Andrei Chrétien. I don't know if that name means anything to Don, but Andrei Chrétien designed, among other things, one of the basic telescopes, you know, like the Coude and so forth. And Chrétien had come up with that. But maybe almost as a lark, he had developed the anamorphic lens for motion pictures or for something. Well, André Chrétien was a very old French scientist, engineer, and they actually found him and they brought him to Rochester because they were using his design to make these anamorphic lenses at Bausch & Lomb. And the reason Bausch & Lomb was doing this because Bausch & Lomb knew how to make sills. And this thing has got a lot of cylinder lenses in it. I mean, after all, when you're making eyeglasses, you make a lot of cylindrical lenses. And so they made a fortune from making these lenses. And that's all they did was just make the lenses for the cameras and the projectors. They never got involved with all the other garbage that we had to do, you know. They were smart. They must have made a killing on that process. But it wasn't our process. Anyway, there's maybe three basic ways in which you can do anamorphic systems. One is with lenses, and that was the Chrétien method, using cylinder lenses. The second method is to use prisms. There's a guy named, could I possibly remember? Anyway, another engineer who had prisms, because it turns out with certain kinds of prisms you can stretch an image in one direction and not in the other. So prisms are another way of doing it. And the third way that I'm aware of is with mirrors. And what these Dutch engineers have come up with is a mirror system in which, because they're not lenses, you can't go straight through. Obviously, the mirrors have to be slanted, or tilted with respect to that. So that if you have one mirror here and another mirror, and I can't, well, like that, it turns out you project into that, you can stretch the image. But the thing is that because the mirrors are at an angle like that, it not only stretches the image, but it bends it. And if you do it strongly enough, it bends it just as much as this printer does. And I
In
said,
other words, you don't need the printer.
now, I'll take it a step further. On my own, I said, I'm going to demonstrate this. So I went to Louis Rao and I said, I need to get some cylindrical mirrors. What am I going to do? He said, go see, and now you, who was the guy that ran the so-called flat section down at Glensdale?
Oh, yeah.
Mosry up here?
Mose Riopel. He says, you've got to see Mose Riopel. And I said, okay. So I sketched out what I wanted. First of all, I got some sheets of glass, and I had Mert Smith bend them in the furnace, so they're approximately the right shape. Then Mose Riopel took these things. I still have them, incidentally. I still have them in the box. Took these things, polished them into nice sills. I had Mert illuminize them. I borrowed a cinemascope lens from the Strand Theater because I had to do the following. I had an ordinary negative. I didn't have an anamorphic negative. I had an ordinary negative. So the first thing I did is I took the anamorphic lens that I got from the Strand Theater and I tipped it the other way. So I compressed the image this way, so now it was almost square. And then I used the mirrors to spread the image out again. And by tilting them enough, I got the whole damn thing. It's beautiful. That's as far as I went. I did it, I set it up, I asked Dr. O'Brien, I'd like to show you something. I didn't tell him that I had done this. I said, I'd like to show you something. Set it up, projected it in that room in Building 17, the theater. He said, that's very nice.
Oh,
And there it
wow.
lay. Never went down. Now the fact is that, you know, if I had been more of a promoter and entrepreneur, I would have said, look, this has got to be shown to Mike Todd. I think Dr. O'Brien was, I don't know what, maybe Dr. O'Brien isn't such a good guy to run a development department. And so they brought in, who was it, Byron Ziegler. And Byron Ziegler was given the responsibility for development. O'Brien was so
Yeah,
busy.
they split
They
AO
split.
research
Short
up into
period of
two.
time, but then they brought in Victor Niz.
Well, that came much later. By that time, I was
Byron Ziegler would have nothing to do with Victor Ness.
Yeah. Well, the fact is that we'll never know, Don,
Yeah,
but
well done, split research.
yeah. But if O'Brien had come in and said, look, what can we do for the basic business of American Optical, which is the ophthalmic business, and possibly general scientific instruments, lasers, fiber optics.
Yeah.
I mean, he did bring fiber optics, but by that time, a lot of the credibility had been lost as a result of this whole exercise. I mean, it was terribly exciting, and it could have been successful, as, for example, it became very successful for Bausch & Lomb. It also became very successful for Panavision. Do you realize that, in effect, Panavision took the best out of Todd AO and has made a tremendous business out of it? They've got nothing but very high performance, wide angle cameras and wide film cameras. And as a result, if you look now, practically every film is credited to Panavision because, or has credits for Panavision because they're using their equipment. Lenses, I remember.
Now that's the projection lens.
Projection lens, that's right. And it has to be quite wide angle too, because you see